is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. I asked him if he ever liked taking rides on trains, and he says not on the ones where everyone dies. Stu Horvath.
It's true. I like to live.
Yeah. So mass transit is out.
You know, one of these days, I'm going to send Ed Coleman down here in a beard and have him co-host with you and see if we can pull off, like, the switcheroo.
Oh, I don't know, man. You know I love a mystery. And I don't know how a spirit gun would take to Ed's smooth skin.
That's true. That's true.
How you doing today, Sto?
Pretty good.
So you have a rather large box sitting in your lap that I know you are dying to talk about. Why don't you tell the listeners what is in store for them today?
It's gigantic, right?
It's huge.
I have on my lap the recent Kickstarter edition of Horror on the Orient Express for the Call of Cthulhu game by Chaosium.
Oh, and of course it came like after we were done playing.
Well, yeah, this is a commitment, man. If there's one thing that Chaosium does well, it's put together a gigantic black hole for your free time.
Yeah.
Their campaigns are some of the best I've ever played and read, but they are all so long. I love it. But, like, what did we do? We did, like, a year and a half on Masks?
Year and a half on Masks, yeah. And we didn't even do Australia.
Yeah, no. You know, it's just one train ride.
Yeah.
You think that it would be shorter, but it's not. This is, I would say, at least 2 years, probably closer to 3.
Jesus Christ, it's like the long path on Ticket to Ride. Who's got the most cars? Except it's murder.
Yeah, and monsters. Rawr. So the original Horror on the Orient Express was a box set that came out in 1991, and it was cool. I had it. It was like 4 books, a bunch of handouts, like a cardboard statue thing that you put together. It was in like this really flimsy box, like a cardstock box. You could never quite get the stuff back in it. And literally the box is less than half the size of this.
Really?
Yes.
With 4 books and the inserts.
Yes. It's basically about an inch.
That's it?
Yeah, and this thing is easily close to 3.
Oh, no, I can see, like, the contraction of your biceps as you're lifting it up. The thing is a heavy, heavy thing.
Yeah, and keeping with the original's inability to put the stuff back in, that holds true for this one.
Oh, I can see the box puffing up.
It was closed all the way and perfectly aligned when I first received it, but I've never been able to stuff this stuff back in here and have it fit right. So obviously this is massively expanded. The idea is, you know, I don't want to get into too much because it's really cool and you should play it. But Nyarlathotep's got a thing going on, as he usually does in a Call of Cthulhu game.
That jerky Nyarlathotep.
Yeah, he's always messing around with your good vacations.
You'd never have a good vacation with Nyarlathotep. That's like, you know what? Oh, my God, I've been working my whole life. I finally saved up for this vacation. I'm going to go somewhere sunny and nice, and it's going to rain every day. And then your plane's going to crash on the way home. But that's neither here nor there.
Murdered by cultists.
Yeah, you know, I've heard it both ways.
So basically the idea is that there's a cult, of course, and they're trying to get pieces of this idol called the Sedefkar Simulacrum. You get in the box little puzzle pieces for each piece of the simulacrum. It's basically like a creepy dude, and you have to find 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head, and then you put the thing back together again. In game, it's the size of a person, but you have like these cool tokens to hand out to your players. And conveniently, each of these pieces is hidden somewhere along the route of the Orient Express. So you get to ride the Orient Express all the way to Turkey, and then you have to go back because there's stuff that happens. There's a lot going on. The pieces of the statue are all things of power, and the entities that have them don't really want to give them up, and they've kind of warped things, and there's a lot of weird stuff. There's also a vampire.
Because why not?
Yeah. There's also another book called Reign of Terror, which takes place during the French Revolution, which involves the vampire, and you could bolt it in. So it's a whole additional book.
So it's just like a side mission that you can just bolt on, like, well, we're going to stop in Transylvania for a hot second. You might as well get off the train, stretch your legs, take a pee, go kill this vampire.
So the way that they expanded this is super interesting, and I think that it might be the height of a Call of Cthulhu campaign in terms of like structure. Masks is always going to be my favorite, but boy, this one really comes close in what it attempts to do. So obviously these pieces of the statue have been in Europe for a long time, and the vampire's been around for a long time. He wants the pieces of the statue too. And when you hit certain points in the story, you set aside your 1920s characters and you play flashback missions going back to ancient Rome, the Victorian era, and the Dark Ages, all of which have Call of Cthulhu rule sets, for settings. Yeah, so you go back to these periods of time and like you play the history that your characters learn. Like they find a book and it's just like a journal and it's like, oh my God, this stuff happened. And then it, like the fade out kind of flashback wiggities happen.
Amazing.
Like Wayne's World.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. And you get this pre-generated characters and it's like, this is what's going on. And you play it out. And I think that's just so brilliant. It has a lot in common with the video game Eternal Darkness for the GameCube, which does this, where every chapter is a different historical period. I would be surprised if the folks who did the reissue of Horror on the Orient Express hadn't played that. This stuff was all in the original game, but it was like they just took every handout and were just like exploded it and made it a playable scenario. So every bit of the story is now playable. In the old version, it wasn't. And I think that maybe somebody just played that game and was just like, we should do that. And that's what Reign of Terror is. It's another set of historical flashback stuff that you could slip in when you're in Paris and you learn a little bit more about stuff, and you play during the French Revolution, which is cool.
And it doesn't have any actual bearing though over the story. So if you just want to play everything in the box, you get the complete story.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like Reign of Terror is a fantastic book and like totally worth playing, but no, you could skip it if you wanted to.
So one of my first real questions about this box set is the train also kind of a character? Because for those listening at home who may not be familiar with the Orient Express, in 1934, Agatha Christie wrote Murder on the Orient Express.
This is true.
Which is arguably one of the greatest detective stories ever written.
It's true.
Including her character, Hercule Poirot.
Yes. His mustache is way better than mine.
His mustache is way better than everybody's, too. Don't take it personally. It's Poirot. Mon Dieu. I had to get that in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So is the train also kind of a character in this as well, or treated as such?
Obviously, some of the inspiration comes from the Agatha Christie novel, and there's all sorts of people who are on the train. You're going to meet lots of interesting characters. A lot of them are going to have their own stories that are tangential to the larger plot. And I think that's really cool because, like, you meet people on trains, and they have their own stories, and, like, you collide. Like the Hitchcock film, Strangers on the Train. It's a confined space where you're stuck with these people and like your stories are going to intertwine momentarily.
Now, being that we've both played Mass of Nyarlathotep and it's world spanning, how does this system feel to you as far as, because you're trapped with these people on the train? Does it at times feel claustrophobic because you're probably on the train with the cultists? Like they're easily in the dining car when you're in your bunk.
There's recommended rules for how to beef up your investigators so they're not quite as fragile as masks.
That's my next question.
And we might have actually wound up eventually using those rules. Just
certainly didn't feel like it.
You can heal faster. Like there's an acknowledgement of the fact that it's harder to bring in new characters because you're on a train.
Yes.
Because you do have to get off the train at certain points. And the thing that my brain gets stuck on is like, well, you're leaving all those characters. Like there's one point where the train stops and like there's a repair and like that one makes sense. But like they have ways to make sure that you don't like get off the train and get on another Orient Express.
Right.
And all of that stuff is interesting, and it gets weird. Like, you go into the Dreamlands, too. That's another one. And it's just so messed up and good. And, like, so many people want this thing that you're chasing after, and you're all on the train. It just works.
It just feels like a pressure cooker to me. Like, the tension has to be palatable.
Yeah.
Because you get off at this town, you fight some cultists, you fight whatever monsters you're going to fight, you get the thing, you get back on the train, and whoever you didn't kill is going to get back on the train with you.
Yeah.
And then whoever you don't know who's actually trying to kill you on the train, they're still on the train. So you're kind of consistently putting yourself in danger, or that's how it feels to me. Like you're never really out of danger.
Yeah. It's less of a sandbox, the Mask of Nyarlathotep, and I mean, I apologize in advance for this, but it's largely on rails. So,
you know what? I mean, after like 60 episodes. I've made enough bad jokes. You were due. Just play through, Stu.
I had to. I couldn't not.
God.
And like people might not like that. I don't mind it when it's on rails. You could have the events and stuff work and still allow for player choice. You don't have to like railroad them to hell, you know? But this is a much more structured, curated experience. You just have to have the right players, or people just have to know that, and like know that they're kind of going into this thing that like you can't just fly to Turkey. You know, like you can, but like come on, guys.
Yeah.
Like, don't try to break the game. It is a little bit of a high concept. You're going to be on the train. No, that's not really going to make sense. That's not necessarily how you would run an efficient, safe investigation. But, like, you just have to commit to the fiction.
So I look at it as I know that I would not have been mentally prepared to play Masks in the first like 5 or so years I was playing D&D, because I wanted a very specific thing, and it was all like hack and slash and, you know, high adventure. I think that something like this, especially since it is on rails, pun intended at this point, because Stu already told the joke, that I would need to have played Masks to get comfortable in the system enough to kind of let something like this happen and unfold as it's going to unfold. Because yes, you are playing an RPG, you can play any way you want. However, I can completely see how someone would try to break this game.
Yeah, and I feel like players naturally, and this might just be because I know you players, my players.
Yeah.
And you guys try to break stuff. That's what you do. It's like you've been training for it your entire lives.
We're gremlins.
I know. But I think that that's just natural. Like you're always going to be constantly testing the limits of what you can get away with. And I think that all you have to do is have a conversation in the beginning and be like, come on, like work with me a little bit.
Yeah.
That said, it probably is not to everybody's taste. And that's probably why I like Masks more ultimately when it all is said and done, because like it really is like this gigantic world-spanning sandbox.
Well, it's interesting because you look at D&D, and D&D is a power fantasy.
Yeah.
Masks, Horror on the Orient Express, Cthulhu games in general are a powerless fantasy.
Yes.
You know, because you're just letting the horror come and get you. You're trying to survive it.
I mean, I do feel like Horror on the Orient Express does push towards the Pulp Cthulhu rules. And I think that it's a little less doom and gloom. Like, you can win this one.
Okay.
The folks who survive will feel good that they did something. Whereas, like, when you finish Masks...
It was a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, you're not sure. You know that it's just going to happen again is the thing. And, like, this is a pretty singular event.
That's kind of neat. I like that.
Yeah.
And I like it because it is different than Masks. Because Masks, in the end of it, we won. And for those listening at home, I'm doing air quotes right now when I say won. But we didn't really win. We kind of just put a plug in it for now. We're hoping that it just doesn't boil over until, like, someone else can come along and then, shifts up. Let me just... plug it back up.
Yeah, because eventually you guys are going to, you know, like your characters' natural lives are going to end.
Yeah, we're half insane and we're really tired.
And at that point, it's like, who's going to watch?
I think that's a better description of it. You know, Masks was kind of like, this is the end of your watch and you're waiting for someone to come and take over. Whereas, I mean, if you're saying that you can not so much get a more satisfying ending out of Horror in the Orient Express, but an actual, like, this is the end. I kind of like that.
Yeah, Masks definitely is the problem that you're stuck with. Even though the story ends, like, you know that those characters are going to have that problem forever, and then it's going to be somebody else's problem, and eventually the bad guys are going to probably win. This definitely has, like, a finished arc, and, like, you wrap up, like, all of these weird, interesting, intertwined historical threads and give all of them a definite ending. And that ending is potentially, I'm not going to say happy, but satisfying and positive.
Well, I like that.
Potentially.
Like,
you could totally screw it up, too. And you could do it catastrophically. It's a Call of Cthulhu game. That said, I think that Masks sort of demands a want for realism to make it hard, to kind of drive home the horror, and to have the horror be like a consequence of messing up the basics of like investigation and stuff that you have to kind of manage as like a real world thing. Whereas this is sort of like, you told us at the beginning that we can't get off the train, that we have to like cut you some slack. But at the same time, you're cutting us a little bit of slack because we're cutting you slack. And like, there's a little bit of push and pull so that people can kind of skate through a little bit more.
Right, because I mean, when I showed up for Masked, I showed up with 2 characters ready-made, ready to go.
Yeah.
Because from Jump Street, I was told that, hey, you should roll up here with 2 characters because these characters are fragile.
Yeah.
I mean, I would still totally show up to Horror on the Orient Express with 2 characters, and my characters would be Agatha Christie, and then when she died, it would be Hercule Poirot. Mon Dieu!
And you'd be wise to do that. But like, I just think that this is, for as long as it is and as crazy as stuff gets, I think that it's just inherently more survivable. Also, this came out before the Masks of Nyarlathotep revision.
Okay.
And you can see a lot of the approach to that book in this revision of Horror on the Orient Express. For as huge as this box is, the organization and the support for the Keeper of Secrets is just... Secrets. Is so good. Everything's arranged well. The connections between everything are super clear. You don't have to do a lot of prep work because the books are like really well written to kind of do it for you on the fly.
Okay.
It's not quite as good and as polished as the Masks of Nyarlathotep reissue, but you could tell that they were thinking about how do we take something giant and massive and complicated, which this is, and make it not giant and massive and complicated to run, because then nobody's going to play it. Yeah. And one of the things that helps with that is the fact that you're constantly doing these historical flashbacks. It's still pushing the game forward, but it gives you like breathing room for the main story, those main characters to like, all right, we can unplug from that. We have like a very narrow story that we're going to do this one night, and it's going to be beginning, middle, end, done. It's like built-in breaks.
Yeah.
And I think that's really smart. And because they enriched the overall fiction too, it's a huge accomplishment.
So I'm like really looking forward to playing it. I know we're probably about like 2 years off from finally getting to play it.
Oh yeah.
Because, you know, we have to restaff the team and get everyone on board with playing a Cthulhu style game again.
Yeah.
However, every time I see that box at the clubhouse, I glance at it. I remember when you got it and you opened it for not the first time, but it was close enough to the first time where everything still fit back in perfectly that, you know, there's a lot to it. Now, is this edition still available for our listeners?
It is not. It was the product of a Kickstarter. It was one of the Kickstarters that like really pissed people off because it took forever to fulfill.
Right.
They made good, I think that everybody was very happy with the final product, but there was like a touch and go, like, is this ever going to come out kind of thing.
That's tough with Kickstarters.
And it really is a massive product. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books, one of which is just handouts, not including the small travel guide. There's maps, there's passports. They have stickers for the passports.
Of course they do. They thought of everything.
There's a matchbox. There's just so much in here. It's crazy. There's layouts for the cars. Kind of getting back to your question about is the train itself a character, there's schematics for each train car. So you can hang them up around the room so you kind of get an idea of where everybody is, where the dining car is, and like you put that up every game so it's always there. By the end of the game, you're going to know that train like the back of your hand. I love that. That's so cool.
And that's one of the things I always shout out to Chaosium for, because the attention to detail in everything that they do is just the kind of thing that I really appreciate as a person who loves games. That little extra touch.
Yeah.
It's giving me smiles for miles. You can see me smiling still. Like I'm thinking about it like, oh man, wait till I put the push pins in. The train's gonna look so dope.
And there's so much original art in here too, but the wealth of historical material that they published is like so helpful. Because like it's the Orient Express. It was a famous thing. So you get pictures of everything. And like you get pictures of everything along the way. So like you have a lot of real world photographs to like hand out to your players, which I think it was natural for me to want to do that in Masks of Nyarlathotep. And I think that like it helped you guys kind of like get the vibe of Cairo, because it's a different city, and especially at that time. So like it's very different from what you expect. But like I had to dig up those historical photos.
Oh, you did a lot of homework for that.
And
yeah,
that
for
wasn't
sure.
easy. And they have all that stuff here for you already, which is really nice. And especially like the stuff a little bit off the beaten path and such. It's handy to have. And I think every character has their own portrait in this too. So like that's
incredible.
Another thing that's like super good. They're all handoutable. And there's just so much to work with. They always do such a great job.
Well, folks, you know that we're fans. You definitely know Stu's a fan of Chaosium.
Yeah, I mean, I have almost all their stuff.
He's chipping away, everybody. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Horror on the Orient Express?
My final thought is you should at least watch Murder on the Orient Express before you play it. Ideally, you should read the book and watch one of or all of the movies.
There's like several versions at this point.
Yeah, and they all kind of bring something different to the table. And I feel like this is a Call of Cthulhu adventure, but there is so much love for that particular novel in here. And you should have your players watch it too. Like, have a movie night and just like get into it. They're all good.
So I agree with Stu, and I'm going to tell you if I could recommend one version. David Suchet, who played Hercule Poirot for the BBC, that's the best version.
He is my Poirot. I love that guy. He just looked the part.
So good, like sassy and indifferent and Belgian, and oh, it's marvelous. I mean, there's like 13 seasons of it. You could just go on Amazon Prime Video and just download the 2-part Murder on the Orient Express. It'll definitely be worth your time. I would definitely recommend checking that out.
It informs the idea of like you being on this luxury train with a lot of weirdos.
And a lot of bad people.
Yeah, and like that's so central to Horror on the Orient Express. And I don't know if you could pull it off really well without going back to that.
God, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, folks, this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. I had a lot of fun with it. Stu, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at VintageRPG, posting every day things like Horror on the Orient Express and other Chaosium gems.
Fantastic. You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about professional wrestling. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. You can also find my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. So, folks, thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate the feedback and the shout-outs. You know, we're seeing what you're up to on Instagram. I love interacting with people on the Twitter. If you're going to be on your phone, definitely take a second and like, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. If you love the Vintage RPG Podcast, don't be shy about stopping over to our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. We put up unboxing videos. Stu does some amazing essays. You get these episodes a little bit early, and it really does help offset the cost of putting on a show every week for everybody, and we really do love doing this. So thank you so much again. For Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.